And my name is Mia Klein. I'm a senior here at Ohio State studying computer science.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're just going to stand and talk. She's going to ask us some questions, and then we'll take some questions from the crowd. Our topic is we both lead privacy teams and cybersecurity teams, which is our unique disciplines. And so we're going to share a little bit about our experience leading.
Alumni of the Ohio State University. I studied here in the mid-90s, majored in Russian language and literature, and then started just a career doing lots and lots of different things. I spent about 17 years building cyber or privacy programs for financial institutions across Central Ohio companies. I then joined the Ohio State University, where I became their first chief privacy officer, helped build out their privacy program and led their cybersecurity governance program. And then from there, you heard Kirk present. He called and asked if I would leave my dream job at my alma mater to go to the state of Ohio to help build out the cybersecurity strategy for the state of Ohio, and of course I did.
That's all I do for now. Your turn.
Hi, I'm Jen Elliott, and my title is the Director of Privacy and Security Governance here at Ohio State. I started as a pediatric nurse. I worked in Cincinnati, went to undergrad in Cincinnati, went to Connecticut, was a pediatric nurse practitioner for a handful of years, came back to Ohio State, went to law school here, and then started working in privacy at the medical center right back here. I was the HIPAA privacy officer there for 11 years, and then Holly came to work for Ohio State, and I met her, and I loved her go get them, let's get it done attitude, and applied for a job and was lucky to work with Holly on campus for a couple of years, and then now I think I've been on campus now for about 5 years.
Great. So now that we know who you are, can you give us some insight to how your teams are structured?
Sure. So this is a question a lot of where do privacy professionals or security professionals report is something we talk a lot about in our profession. I report to the state CIO. We have a pretty federated model of the state of Ohio, so each of our 27 agencies has its own CIO. They don't report into the central CIO. It's a federated collaborative model. I lead the traditional aspects of a cybersecurity program. So I have 3 deputies because they're all talented and doing great work. I have Kevin Wolliver here, who leads our risk management, which is our GRC function, which has the typical things of GRC, third-party risk, training and awareness. Training awareness team is here. The framework and policy team is here. I also lead 2 privacy experts. So Darren Arnold is here, and then Mary Baird is here from our team. I have another deputy who runs our cyber operations unit. So this is where the tools and the tech and the incident response sits. And then I have another deputy that leads my agency information security officer team. So that is our liaison group between, they're sort of like virtual CISOs for the 27 agencies, or like the general teams. And then I have 2 incident response leaders that report to me as we build out our incident response practice. Oh my gosh, Michelle Krogan, my identity leader. So I have one more leader. She is building out identity governance for the state.
Yeah, my crowd's quite a bit different. I have a small but mighty team of 3 people, including myself. A piece of my responsibility is our cybersecurity framework that the university follows. And then the other piece is the privacy program for Ohio State. And so we have one person who is knowledgeable about cybersecurity and manages the framework, writes it, works with people about complying with it. And then we have another person that I work with on our privacy program. And we're basically just kind of building off of what Holly started, the foundation that was created in the past 5 years.
So privacy and security can sometimes pull in the opposite direction. How do you find the right balance between the 2?
I think this is a theme you're going to hear about today. When I talk to privacy professionals, they often can learn pretty quickly cybersecurity controls and techniques and practices. When I talk to my cyber professional colleagues, they can quickly be like, don't do privacy. That's not me. So I think that the expertise is a little bit unique. One thing I think that the security piece, they are often delivering controls or activities like identity and access management has a privacy benefit. So even though in their head they're thinking, I only do identity and access management, that really is a privacy control about restricting access. I think part of it is explaining that to the different team members. And then when it comes to incident response, there's high crossover in expertise because there's the, okay, we need to contain it, eradicate it, go through recovery, but then there's the whole piece that we talked about this morning of breach notification, risk of harm, state notifications, the new CERCIA notification is coming out, and having those privacy experts shepherd that part of the incident, I think is really helpful because the incident response team then has to go back and deal with the next wave of things that are coming to that incident response. I'll do my example in a minute. What is your experience?
So I've worked in two different, models. One is at the medical center, the privacy and security teams were separate. And so we had basically, someone said nerds with computers, I think you said, we had that crowd, and then we had our privacy team that wears a bit more of a compliance hat. And then now that I'm on campus, the privacy and security teams are basically on the same team. So there's folks that wear the cybersecurity hat, but we all report up to the same person. And so how you balance it, adding to what Holly said, one big thing is to just have a process. And so, for example, we have our security risk assessments and, you go through and you check all the boxes related to security, but then also, teaching people about how to spot issues related to privacy and then thinking through that with like a privacy impact assessment and kind of thinking through what the different privacy issues might be. So that's, one way we definitely balance.
If you guys want to share an example of where prioritizing one over the other led to success or
The prioritization is always tricky when you're a leader because sometimes you don't always have the resources you need for all of the things. One example that I had was actually when I was working here. I remember the pandemic. The moment in time, the pandemic happened. What was very interesting, one of the things that Ohio State wanted to be really on the forefront of was contact tracing. And so we had a lot of teams and energy around collecting information about students, faculty, and staff, and who their contacts were, meaning, did I spend more than 6 seconds, more than within 3 feet of you? And I can record that and start watching where the germs are going, right? And big database, right? So this means lots and lots of data in a data lake, getting lots and lots of feeds in from other places. And one of the feeds we got into that data lake was from the medical center, and it was health data, technical, maybe, right? And the thinking that's different between a security professional and a privacy professional goes like this. The security leader was like, we have all this data, we're good, I need to share it with landlords so they can do contract tracing of their tenants because we need to make sure this germ doesn't spread. Because they're thinking, I've secured this according to HIPAA, therefore I can use it because I possess the data. And in the privacy world, possession of the data does not equal the ability to use the data for any reason. And so there has to be a contemplative analysis of, just because I possess data, I might need extra consent, I might need more disclosure before I can use it for my intended purpose. And so I really had to work with that security team even to say, I get that it's secure according to HIPAA, but the HIPAA privacy rules say that this data has to be used for the benefit of the covered entity or the benefit of the patient, not this abstract, landlords should get access to it. So I think that this is how that tension can sometimes rise between two.
Yeah, and building on that example, another one is the logs that you get when you enter on campus and you connect to the Wi-Fi. So there's creates a lot of information about where people are in certain parts of the day and things like that. So the idea being they have the logs, but you really have to think through and have a process of approval before you use the logs to consider privacy. And then I also think about privacy in the context of incident response. So something happens, data is exposed, that you stop the exposure, but then the breach response piece of it, thinking through what was exposed, how are you going to notify people, what's the best way you can notify people to limit the loss of trust in your institution if data was exposed. I think about that in the context of security. You're pressing the buttons and you're containing the issue, but then how do you take that a step further and think through privacy when you're notifying?
All right, so we know collaboration is key in this field. What strategies have you found effective in fostering collaboration between privacy and security?
I know. one of the ways that I try to lead, and you can't always, sometimes you have to go in there and be, this is the rule, you need to follow the rule. Sometimes that is the approach one has to take. What I try to do is start with, what does the institution want to achieve? And then how can I develop a solution for them that meets the privacy and security requirements without starting with that? So one example, I haven't been to the state of Ohio super long, so I don't have a lot of Ohio stories quite yet. But one of the things they wanted to do, remember a couple of years ago, they wanted to start texting students. Students don't read email. This is what they told me. They don't read email. We want to send them lots of text messages. I'm like, they ain't gonna read that either. But that's not my use case, right? So when I think of texting as a privacy professional, you need to get that consent text their mobile phone. So how do I don't want to go to them and say, okay, let's put a consent platform for texting, because that sounds compliance, boring, and an obstacle. So what I start with is, what do you want the texting experience to be for your students? Do you want them to get 6 text messages a day? 2? 1? If they say stop, what does that stop apply to? And so if they start thinking through the user experience of texting as a communications tool, they start thinking through, if every college and every advisor is texting their student, at a certain point, the student's going to say stop. And so what does that stop apply to? What about emergency? So there is a program on campus for emergency texting when there's emergencies happening. If you say stop to Apple reminding you to use your iPad, does that apply to your emergency text? But I think building that out and having the business think about it from a solution standpoint was really effective, because then I got my privacy benefit of consent, revocation, notice, but I didn't have to lead with that. And so that's an example of how you can use the sort of spin it on its head a little bit and bring the solution forward. And then the security pieces come along with it. So we bought a secure solution, which is a little bit easier, because you're thinking about, is the vendor secure, and less about how did you implement it so you're honoring privacy requirements.
So on strategies for collaboration, so like I said, with 2 different experiences here at Ohio State, and we were on separate teams, so privacy was in more of a compliance world and security was in the IT world. We really it was kind of a seamless collaboration where I knew where the tech nerd thing stopped and the privacy piece started, and where the overlap was. And the CISO and I worked together pretty seamlessly, really, to communicating like once a week about what was going on. And I knew where my expertise stopped and his started, and vice versa. And both teams were very good at spotting issues. So the security team, top to bottom, was very good at understanding, oh, this is security piece, but they also look for privacy issues and let us know what those were. And then now when I'm on the same team as the security group, it's really just kind of going to work and provide value, teaching day by day about you're doing security, but when you're looking at access controls and you're looking at, how much data you can give someone and trying to back it up and maybe not sending as much data to the vendor as you originally planned to, those sorts of things are actually privacy. And so you can look for issues in where privacy and security overlap, and really just kind of explaining where that overlap is. I know for some reason in healthcare, it was easier to explain where the overlap was for privacy and security. I don't know if it's just because it's been around for so long, or even just maybe the way that teams were structured, but over, on the campus side, really kind of, introducing people to a lot of what you're doing in cybersecurity has a privacy impact, and teaching people how to spot issues in that way.
Now let's take a look at the big picture. What are the biggest challenges you face in maintaining both privacy and security, and how are you addressing them?
You want me to go first? One of the things I was thinking about is we have a new state of Ohio AI policy. It just applies to state agents. And the AI policy has been a really interesting nexus between the privacy practitioners and the cybersecurity practitioners. So if you think about what you might put in a policy, this one has an AI council. Agencies that want to use generative AI bring forward their ideas for consideration. And part of the bringing it forward, there is a cybersecurity and privacy assessment that happens as part of that. And so, of course, I go to my team and I say, hey, can you create this assessment? And the team spent a lot of time really being thoughtful about it. On the cybersecurity side, that profession is more mature when it comes to applying technologies that have controls that can make things secure. So for example, you can use multi-factor, right? So there are things that you can use that are technologies that are clear. When it comes to a policy that talks about being on the lookout for fairness and equity, there isn't a privacy tool that you can put alongside a Gen AI solution that like, yep, equity, balance, fairness, awesome. Bias, they're not small. Like you have to think through it. And so my cyber professionals were just like, I don't know how to detect bias in a Gen AI solution. Like we're still learning that as a society, how that works. But I think those conversations highlight that the privacy piece can be different, but it's still related to cyber. Where we struggle with it a bit. Some of the controls that we're using are, and also like the risk is different. So if you think about applying cybersecurity to a Gen AI tool, you might be thinking about Microsoft Copilot. We have a strong agreement with Microsoft. We've probably done security assessments of Microsoft. They have SOC 2s. They have things that show that they are secure, right? And then on top of that, we add things like multi-factor, monitoring, et cetera, to make sure that that environment is secure. When it comes to the risk of the privacy risk with Gen AI, it's really about if this information was disclosed, would the human, me, would I be embarrassed by that? So if somebody knew that information about me, or if they knew that I was in crisis and I was seeking help because I'm in crisis, and I would be embarrassed, like what is the technology control that protects that? And that is very abstract to like think through. And I think that's where we're heading as a team are really around what can we do? Human in the loop. I mean, we talk about that a lot. I know I had to be the first to talk about Gen AI today. But human in the loop, ethics and concern reporting can be a way to help with that. So if people feel like their data might be used inappropriately, they call a hotline and can use that as an indicator that things might not be great. And then how do you go back over time and say, we thought this tool was ethical, didn't have bias, et cetera. And how do you monitor it over time to make sure it didn't deviate a little bit from what its intended outcomes were? But those are all manual and difficult pieces of a Gen AI program when it comes to tech.
So biggest challenges I would say is teaching people where privacy is already a part of their job. And so here we have security coordinators and privacy pros, and we started to get a piece of, well, that's not, I do security, the privacy pro will handle the privacy part. When actually, there's, like I said, there's just a huge overlap. And also teaching other areas of the university, like our data governance program. We have the luxury of a very wonderful data governance program with data stewards and a great structure on governing data that's growing, and teaching all of these different groups of people how privacy is already a huge part of their job. So for example, the data stewards have to look at, can this data be accessed, used, and disclosed for the purpose the person's asking for? That's all privacy right there. So training that, herd of folks about privacy and how it's already part of their job. The researchers, research is a pillar of the mission of Ohio State. And so much of research is about consent and privacy and the common rule. There's, you read consent forms, there's a big piece of privacy in that. And there's a big aspect of research and privacy in HIPAA as well. And so teaching, these groups how much privacy is already a part of the work they do, and having them kind of appreciate that and spot the issue and analyze that issue kind of separate from just give me a bunch of data so I can get my research done kind of thing. The other thing is cost. The different software that you can use and, running a program in an institution this big, you really have to, it's expensive, and you really have to show the value that you're providing is worth the cost that people are spending on. So we're constantly thinking about, well, how much does this cost and what's the value being provided and how are we showing value what we're doing, overall. And then along those lines is showing efficiency or making sure things are efficient. So looking through, anything we're asking people to do, kind of looking at it from the standpoint of how do we make this more efficient and not repeat in a big bureaucracy like this, different things that other people are already doing, and how do we just kind of make it more efficient for everyone overall to look at privacy from a compliance perspective.
moving into compliance, how do you navigate the complex landscape of privacy regulations and cybersecurity standards?
The state of Ohio, and there are fewer that I have to comply with, actually. So we do, Kirk mentioned some of the federal rules that we have to comply with, but I don't have to spend time thinking about California's privacy law. California's privacy law, which is a sort of burden of the law. So ours is simple. We use frameworks. I think the beauty of the new NIST framework that brings in the privacy controls alongside the security controls, you start seeing the synergy between these programs. So in my I've had jobs where you're going to the IT teams and saying, tell me about your access control. And then the security person would come over and say, tell me about your access control. Now we can do that, ask the question once, and it sort of benefits both programs. And so you really get a lot of efficiency by using frameworks.
It's a complex landscape of changing laws for sure, especially from a privacy perspective. It's pretty exciting because you're seeing international law affecting the laws in the United States. And one thing being so big and having everything from an airport to a lab that looks at how cars work to a giant medical center, you name it, we probably have it going on here. And so in general, a lot of those laws don't apply, but if the fact pattern's just right about anything that we're doing in the state of California, it might apply. And so what we're starting to do now is building on a lot of the work that Holly's done with we have privacy principles, and the principles include a lot of the different key aspects of many of the privacy laws: notice, choice, consent, issue response, incident response, that kind of a thing. And so that's like a very good grounding aspect to the program. And so what we're doing is building on some of that and looking at where in the university are we doing things that might trigger this international law or this, state of California law, and kind of, we have the luxury of sort of drilling down on that. But, staying how you navigate that complex, landscape of privacy regulations. We also rely on our Big Ten partners quite a bit. We have a Big Ten privacy group, and we get together at least monthly and then every other week for coffee. And we have a lot of the same, similar issues going on. And so we do listen to what's going on with the different schools in the Big Ten and how they're addressing things as well.
All right, looking forward, what emerging technologies do you think will have the biggest impact on privacy and cybersecurity?
Talk about zero trust. So I think that's something that's really interesting to think about, just philosophically thinking about what it means to have a zero trust, to build zero trust architecture. Again, it's a buzzword, but I think it highlights at one level, in order for it to work, I have to know a whole lot of information about a human, and it has to be individually identified. Like I have to know a lot of information about Amanda so I can recognize deviations in her behavior, so I can make sure that it's her and not a threat actor. And that massive amount of information I have to collect and secure and restrict access to is a privacy concern, right? So it's everything from where is she physically, where has she been physically, where is she going, where is she accessing the network from, what is she doing when she's on the network, and when does that activity become weird, right? And so for me to know what weird looks like, I need to know a lot about her. That's a privacy concern. But I get a security benefit, right? Because I know so much about Amanda, I can protect her from a threat actor stealing credentials and impersonating her, whatever that avenue looks like. So deep security benefit, lots of ability to not bug the user with user IDs and passwords, but lots of privacy.
So emerging technology, this is low-hanging fruit, but AI for sure. A lot of questions about how we use it. How do we govern the use of AI? What does breach response look like when you throw in AI in the context of AI? You name it, anything related to AI, we're really kind of looking at and figuring out, how will we attack that, and are kind of excited to get our hands on some specific, fact patterns of, how would we attack this from a privacy perspective. We do have a compliance framework at Ohio State that we use that really is grounding from the standpoint of anyone who is working in some sort of a compliance capacity at Ohio State, people who do deal with radiation safety or research or privacy or security, kind of, ground ourselves in this framework. And so what we try to do is look at some of these different technologies through the eyes of that framework, and how are we, attacking it from a compliance perspective. And then the other thing is biometric authentication. That's been around for a while, but it's certainly growing. And there are laws in different states about how you use biometrics, and the idea of, your social security number being exposed on the dark web is one thing. You amp it up with different biometrics, it just kind of goes to another level. And so kind of looking at biometrics and information security and privacy is another hot topic.
To wrap things up, what's one key takeaway you want the audience to remember from today's?
Have time for some questions, so start me. I think one of the things I've been talking a lot about is like start. I think what happens a lot in this profession, because AI is complicated, because zero trust is complicated, there's a hesitancy to like overthink it and not just start. So one thing we're doing in my team at Ohio, or the state of Ohio, is we are piloting some Gen AI around policy. So one of the things that's the biggest pain in the world is to like weed through all the policies to figure out what you need to do as a result of, like, I want to do this business thing. What are all the policies implicated in that decision? And so we're using a Gen AI tool to kind of like help weed through that. And two reasons for that. One, it gets my team experience, like, let's not be afraid of AI and stop talking about it. Let's use it so we can figure out how to secure it, train people on it, et cetera. So that's a piece. And then there's this other benefit of, if it works, it can be helpful for our end users who are struggling with navigating through all of our policies. So I think start.
And then I would say the relationships in a context where you're in a big bureaucracy like this, and we're going out and asking different people to take different steps for compliance. Those relationships are huge, and you already know that. And, kind of what Holly, the example that she gave about, talking about compliance and texting and how that all started out. It just didn't start out with the conversation of you have to buy something really expensive and then you have to do A, B, and C. But it started out with kind of a, how can I help you meet your business needs? And so kind of having that solutions-oriented approach, which is way more fun than being the wall. And then also building those relationships and helping people. That might be my nurse coming out, but it really does help drive compliance in a more fun, more effective way, I think, in the long run.
Do you have some extra time? Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
I thought that there was like a data breach in this, right? One of the things they kind of highlighted is that I know that like OSU's got like camera information and microphone and other stuff. But can you speak a little bit in both your experiences on like, as like technology progresses now, like that data can be kind of mined, like the videos and other stuff. Basically know where people were and help with other kinds of applications. How long this data is stored, how long like sensor the campus, and then any like policies or stuff to like store that data so that like future emerging technologies.
So we do have records retention policies across all of our state agencies. I don't know what the records retention policy is. That would be like the Department of Transportation, their retention policy on that. I would say we secure it, right? So the idea is that, there's records retention period of how long you can keep it. And then in that interim, they have a very robust information security program to secure it. I mean, I have a lot more information, I'm sorry.
And I'm the same, apology. Data retention, processes that we have here at Ohio State, they probably have a very specific one that they use for that type of data. And then also just adding to that is the processes for using the data. So it's similar to the access logs, for the connecting to the internet here. What's the process for actually looking at that data? Who has to approve its use? That kind of a thing, instead of it just being sitting there and being handed out for any question that might come forward. So the other aspect that we have to worry about too is the public records piece. And so, I don't know what the public records requirements for that are, but I imagine that they are subject to different public records requests. And so there are probably requirements around that as well.
I don't know if I want to say that Europe is quote leading on something, because I'm not sure I want to follow Europe, but we've had really strong HIPAA laws for a while. don't have in the United States and Ohio particularly strong laws with regard to people's other sensitive information. Obviously, we've seen a lot of breaches. Do you think that we need, simple question I asked this morning, do we need to look at more effective requirements for the data that people are hoovering up about us, some of which are really sensitive, some of which just collectively we have enough of it, really intrusive?
I don't know. I guess it's kind of where I'm going today. So if they came down with a federal law that required me to secure data really strongly, I'm going to do the same cybersecurity program that I'm doing today based on this, because any law that hits me is going to point to some sort of framework that's not the law. So one of HIPAA's limitations is it was somewhat prescriptive. So it had a lot of detail in the reg on what you needed to do to secure the data, but it's now 20 years old.
Maybe older.
To be precise.
Oh, no,
This is-
I think it's somewhere like 2000.
HIPAA has a provision where encryption is like addressable, meaning it's choosable. You can choose whether to encrypt or not. In 2024, you got encrypted on top. So I don't know if it would really matter to me. It wouldn't necessarily change my program. I think that the CERCIA coming out that's going to require notification will be interesting, because what is a security incident? And then what is CISA going to do with all this?
Seems like a lot of people collect a lot of data and have it here, but safe.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about the government here,
Yeah.
but the business.
Yeah.
No, I agree. This will drive a lot. And then also, because there's these different laws hanging out and, that the university has to follow, like FERPA and GLDA, it just kind of drives the whole program overall. And so, if you have to deal with consent and notice in one context, you're thinking about that in the other as well. So, yeah.
So the data centers in Ohio, what laws are they subject to? Are they state of Ohio laws, or are they like national or defined?
So if like a Microsoft data center got hacked. I didn't mean that, thought I forgot you were there. Google, if a Google data. He's not here. Is Google in the house? Not that it would happen, it's purely hypothetical. I think, so the analysis, so it's breached, the data is exfiltrated, the entity that, so the state of Ohio, if we owned that data, we would do a breach analysis on that data. And then we work with smart people to determine who are they a resident of, and what law. In my case, Ohio law is what applies to Ohioans. If the company was a European company that had data here, they would probably analyze it against their framework, but then also if they're Ohio citizens in their data set, it's a quilt, right? So it's not one data breach law applied to the whole data set. You could have a data set that has 37 different data breach laws. Did I get that at all right, Aaron? I don't know if you
About the importance of, privacy programs being able to show value. How are you measuring the value, and then how are you communicating that to?
So that's something we're working through right now. We're looking at how do we come up with metrics and show those metrics, and then also show progress of the program over time. That's the more gray piece. How do we show progress over time? As part of the compliance framework, we report on different aspects of the framework over the year, and we have to give it a rating, how mature we are in leadership engagement and training and policies and that kind of thing. So we can show progress there. But other than numbers and that framework, we're still trying to wrap our heads around how do we show progress and show that value. So if you figured out, there are a couple of good publications out there that really explain that. And at the end of the day, we're always trying to think about how do we show that, I think someone said something about it's not a privacy decision or a security decision, it's a business decision. And how do we show that we're supporting the information that they need to make business decisions? That's something that is part of the story that we want.
So in answering that question about your level of maturity,
Mhm.
that's there's so much ambiguity built into that answer. How do you determine your level of maturity in an area?
Yeah, it's very subjective. Our framework has some guidelines about how you think that through. So basically it goes somewhere from, you look at a process, is it ad hoc or is it repeatable, and are you testing it? So that's kind of the range. But there's a bit of a guessing, a subjective piece to it for sure. Usually, often what happens is you write the presentation that we give to our more senior group of leaders, and then the compliance people say you're being too hard on yourself. You can rate it a little more mature than what you're saying. So that's one way to do it.
I also have one on, do you ever, how do you guys work through when folks say, oh, well, that's the responsibility of the security team, or kind of sharing that ownership of the responsibility of the application owner? Is it the, kind of end user side, is it the people developing, where does that responsibility lie when it comes to security and privacy, which is everything?
Well, this is the thing that I've been talking about a lot most recently, is that security is a shared responsibility, and they're actually using Archie charts to kind of explain it to leaders, because leaders can often be like, that's the security team, oh, you've got all security covered. And I'm like, no, all I can do is tell you about vulnerabilities I need you, application owner, to patch. And so just being really clear about what my services are, what my team services are, and what the agency is responsible for, but it's a lot of communication, because when you're leading, you have lots of inputs, and you think, I hired a leader, they're doing security stuff, great, but you forget that what I'm really doing is highlighting and prioritizing issues for my agency partners to tackle. So I'm not in there like improving their coding practices that they have. I support, I help manage, I buy tools, I help prioritize, I help with urgency, but I can't actually upgrade their server. Good question.
That's something I'm super passionate about. It's just kind of an exciting area to make a difference in, because people they don't see the privacy in their job yet. They're doing it, and pretty well actually, but to kind of talk with them about these things that you're doing with the marketing and the cookies and the, you name it, access control, that kind of thing, that's all privacy, and just really having them appreciate that that's part of the job. I think there's a great opportunity to do that with privacy, especially because the cybersecurity piece can be more intimidating to kind of like the average person. So.
I'm